hello and welcome and thank you for joining us, or should we say Kitos?
Oh yes, well done. Only word I had actually filming in Finland, it was pathetic. But then actually they're very much the same as the rest of the Nordics because it's such a different language. It's just not close to Norwegian, Icelandic or any of it.
They always appreciate you trying, even if it's just one word. I went round Helsinki going, Kitos, Kitos, Kitos.
Well, the word I picked up from the film, because I haven't been to Finland, was Sisu. So it'd be really good to hear a bit more about that later on. That was fascinating, that. Yeah.
To start off then, we've got Lesley in the studio. The film Finland is, tell us, is it out for everybody? Have you got showings lined up? Where can people see it?
I think there's about 14 screenings now. It's easiest if you go to my website on the events page. They're all there in glorious Technicolor with all the details you'd need, which is lesleyriddoch.com/events. It's not going out to the public because it's going to a couple of cinemas, including the Cameo in Edinburgh and the Eden Court in Inverness and Montrose Cinema, and there's a couple of others. They tend to want it not to be available on YouTube because they kind of think nobody's going to come if it's, possible to sit home. And I don't know about that myself, actually, because I think people like to come together and they do like that Q&A session to really get into the subject. But still, it's their gig, if you like. So if that's their rules. So it'll go online after most of the screenings are finished by mid-March. And the people who kindly donated, 228 people donated to make this film possible. And again, thank you. What a blinder. But they have already got a link. They got one kind of last year, basically. So that's where we are.
Yeah,
excellent.
That's great.
Well,
that's good.
We have seen it because we are two of those 228, however many it was. And I, as ever, loved it, but I felt quite differently approaching this one, and I put off watching it for a good few days after we got the link, which is odd because I was thinking, oh God, I know what this is going to be. It's going to be beautifully shot. It's going to be inspirational. It's going to be positively full of wonderful things, and then I'm going to be horribly depressed because none of them are here.
Well, I didn't respond like that at all. I have watched it twice, actually. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, for anyone watching at the moment who doesn't know the title, it's called Finland, the happiest country that almost didn't exist. So great title. And I tell you, I really liked the interaction between you and Gavin Hannigan, who, I know he was there as the cameraman, but he did a lot more. He did a lot more than that, and I'm sure he was, doing loads of stuff even before it got going. And I loved that bit that he did in the library because I'm a bit of a library fan too. And I kind of thought, wonderful. Oh God, that library is fantastic. So I just really, really enjoyed it. One of the things that I know Fiona and I we both noticed this, that there was quite a few times during the film where you used a phrase like how good the Finns are at finding, common sense solutions and then making them work. And that got, and there's examples of that, of course, in the film, and some of them fantastic ones. And it got the pair of us thinking about, I wonder if Scotland will be as good at doing that. And and then you also mentioned Sisu. This word I think means something like resilience or Finnish spirit or determination. And I was thinking, I wonder if we've got an equivalent of that. And Scots we can be pretty determined. But
well, we do. It's Smeddum.
Yeah.
It is there in our thinking. I don't know how much it's there. The thing is, it's been there in our history as well, but I don't know how much it's there in our governance. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's kind of quite different in all of this stuff is that things that totally make sense, are sort of doable there. But that's because these guys have worked for such a long time to produce trust. And that takes a lot of patience, but it takes the courage to believe that if you give people power, a bit of room for maneuver, total control over their professional lives, in the case of schools.
Yeah.
There's nobody there's no education authority sitting over the shoulders of the teachers that we spoke to. And that is one of the reasons that well, it's chicken and egg, of course, because the teachers themselves decided that even primary school teachers would have to have master's degrees back in the 70s. And that was taking that upon themselves to get that level of professional credentials enabled the authorities to say, I think these guys can be trusted to run a school, so we'll just back right off. And that in turn meant that people thought, this is actually a pretty good job because we're not spending hours and hours doing paperwork for people who'll never even come into the school. And that actually also speaks to a thing that I seem to never end having to point out about Scotland, that we are still essentially feudal, which means that we have hierarchies, that we don't trust the people further down the food chain to just run their lives. So, the way the Finns approach stuff, which is to say, well, why don't you get on with what you're doing? And you strip out that whole layer of oversight. That is not something that actually any political party in Scotland is grappling.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's another word that I noticed a few of them came up with, and it's in that it's probably part of trust that maybe ties in with what you just said, and that was security. And they talked about food security. They talked about that whole readiness for, their bunkers and their training and vitamin D levels and all these things. And you kind of think, well, if that's all taken care of by the state, somebody's planned that and put it in place and it's part of your life. That gives you a level of security that maybe makes it easier to trust that the state's got your best interests at heart. I kind of think that's something that we don't have either. Well, we don't have the control that they've got either over a lot of our resources, which was another word that came up, control at local level.
Well, let's just take one of them because there's so much to say about Finland and security. And of course, all the awful events of this year have kind of rather thrown, military security into sharp relief. And the only people, as far as I can see, who are ready for this are Finland. When they exited the Second World War, having to pay reparations to Russia because they had actually let the Nazis walk through Finland to sieges in Russia, mostly, in fact, to get their own bit of land back that the Russians had taken. All very complicated, but the Russians invaded them. They repelled them. Russians came back. Finns thought, geez, we need to just let the Germans do their stuff because that will push the Russians out of our bit. It didn't happen. The Germans lost, the Finns lost, and like many on the wrong side at the end of the Second World War, they were made to pay reparations. They're apparently the only people who completed the reparations. And in the course of that, they seem to be, my thought for a title at one point was the unsinkable Finns, because there's almost nothing that seems to have happened in their history that hasn't sort of fairly quickly been turned into a bit of a bonus. And the bonus of having to do the reparations was that they had no money, essentially. So they paid most of the reparations in kind, which meant that at the beginning it was disastrous because the Russians had their icebreakers, their ships, everything. But that meant they had to get off the mark and build icebreakers really quickly again. And that is why they are the kings of the icebreakers today, and actually shipbuilding kings still, because they had to get off the mark. They really honed what they were doing. And they've just landed, last year, they landed a massive deal with, and now you see why, Trump's America for more icebreakers, because that's, speaking to America's ambitions in the Arctic. But that will actually boost their economy for possibly a decade, the size of it.
That's interesting. I hadn't put that link together. I don't know why, with the icebreakers and ambitions of Trump.
So that was after the Second World War. And then after the First World War, well, during the First World War, and there was the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. As I understood when you covered that bit, then that was the beginning of a possible independent Finland opportunity. But then there was a civil war in Finland, kind of in parallel to the way it happened in Russia. So you've got the Reds, which were, workers, probably small-time farmers, against the white kind of paramilitaries. And whites were more kind of landowners, presumably, and they were in Russia, landowners, middle classes maybe. And I mean, if you've got a civil war in a country, that must set off reverberations for years and years afterwards. I mean, it's quite, and the Whites won. It wasn't like it was the left-leaning Reds that won. It was the Whites won. So I assumed that was difficult for Finland to, overcome that, even although after the First World War, of course, they were independent.
Well, yes, and actually it sounds odd, but on the other hand, it's exactly what happened in Ireland. I mean, independence immediately brought forces to bear that just began to really exacerbate the divisions that hadn't been able to be democratically dealt with, basically, for a very long time. So exactly all of that, I mean, it's a class issue that was is still tearing countries apart, but certainly was, tearing every country apart at that point. Russia next door, obviously, had a revolution. So the thing that's astonishing about it is, even though it was incredibly bloody, and as I understand it, there was more people killed in Finland than any other civil war until Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Wow. So that's how bad it was, pro rata, small population. And the idea that these guys got over this at all is kind of mind-blowing. So we spent a wee bit in the film just saying, how did that actually happen? And some of it was that the victors, the Whites, if you like, they learnt to play nice, and they were encouraged to play nice by Britain, France, and other allies who were saying, don't move in on the Reds and just annihilate them. You all have to live together. So there was quite a lot of and Sweden, there was quite a lot of pressure from other countries who were sort of watching and saying, you're in a precarious position as a country, don't screw it up. And there's some parallels as well, actually, with where we are at the moment with other countries, giving conditions in a way to a new country. But actually, it sort of seemed to fall on receptive ears. For example, my big thing, land reform. They had gone through land reform immediately after the revolution, and that was part of almost the Whites saying, these are the sort of issues the Reds really wanted to have dealt with. So we're going to give them. The Reds didn't win, but we're going to do it. We're going to do a lot of workers' reforms. We're going to do land reform, which was massive. And at the beginning, they excluded everybody who had fought on the Red side. But within 6 months, they reversed that and gave it to everyone. Eventually, they got over themselves at a rate of knots. Yeah. They had then, second boring but important small point, they had municipal elections. Now, stay awake, everyone, because this is not Trump. This is not bright lights. This is not the world ending. This is the business of having small, powerful localities that have elections that mean you all have to stand, you then all get elected, and you all have to deal with one another at local level on pretty meaningful decisions. So that was number two. And then, of course, when they drifted towards the Second World War, Russia gave them an external ally that got everybody basically on side. So there was, at one stage, there was something like a fifth of the entire population of Finland in the army. So that kind of, by the end of that, there wasn't too much discussion about the Civil War, although they had their 100 years existence as a country not that long ago. And it was tremendously low key because it still felt like not something that you could, scream about from the rafters.
Yeah. Interesting, especially when you think about that. It's that whole losers consent thing, isn't it? How you have to bring the two halves back together again after the independence. And I think hopefully that's something we'll be factoring into our it takes sort of mature. I mean, obviously there was a bit of pressure from the Allies in the First World War, but to get it done. But it also, you need. It takes a bit of maturity, doesn't it, on both sides? The people who lost as well, not to feel they want revenge, and even the ones who won. So it's pretty impressive hearing that.
Well, another aspect of security you were talking about was food security, which was something, there was statistics that came out while we were there, which I just couldn't believe, that Finland today has the best food security of any country in the world, right? Finland is 70% forest and a third in the Arctic. Its ports are icebound for half the year. How is that possible? Right?
How is it possible? So, and how can we not do it as well?
Funny, because when I asked people, they were sort of like, I'm not too sure. And I said, honestly, do you not think the fact that you have more cooperatives, more food cooperatives, and you've had them since the early 1900s, because while Finland was being run by Russia, they weren't allowed political organisation. So that's why they all tanked into running cooperatives, also because it was an effective way to try to, beat the man, as it were. Farmers, small farmers, were able to get decent prices if they banded together, and they were getting picked off on their own. So cooperatives came in as an absolute baseline for everything in Finland. They're there now, hyper big style. And it's, as the guy that we interviewed, who's a professor of all of this, said, it's not just that our food is homegrown, it's home owned.
Yeah.
And so the distribution is home owned. So the big food security is that whatever they grow is absolutely designed to be kept in Finland and isn't getting shipped around the world, and they're not looking for massive grain imports from anywhere else.
Yeah, there was a phrase that it might have been the guy you're talking about said it was that when the cooperative is big enough, it regulates the market. I thought, well, that's a refreshing way of looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah, they've got I can't remember what the Finnish word for it is, but they have a system. We couldn't go into all of this in as much detail as you might like, but there is a system where actually even commercial firms producing electricity do it at cost price. And it's got a name, that system. It gets brownie points for the companies, but it's a very good example of how that much cooperative behavior in a marketplace starts to make everyone play nice, because, the punters are expecting more. Let's say, just as we speak, as it Southwest Water has left, big wedges of Sussex and various other places with no water at all. Private ownership of a key asset. I mean, Finland is right at the other end of that, with not just public ownership of assets, but cooperative electricity, cooperative water. I mean, it's mind-blowing, actually, but it strikes me in a lot of ways. The Finns almost... there's a funny old-fashioned thing about a lot of it. For example, they never wheeled out their trams. So they have an unbelievably great tram system. And when I said to them, gosh, when did you start doing this? They just sort of quietly said, 150 years ago. And then they can deliver affordable housing because they still own 60% of the land in Helsinki. So they never sold it off. The period that everybody else went through when they were trying to realize some money for from green assets. Basically, every council has flogged off whatever it owned to try to keep, things going. Helsinki never did that. So now, as you'll see in part of the film, they actually contribute money to the central exchequer, to the central government. They are not funded by central government, because of the amount of rents and everything they get back in from what they own.
Yeah, I thought it must have been something like that they owned the land. The bit where you did about, they thought, let's not have the ports in the city. Let's put the ports, out the city, and presumably they had to build a bit of infrastructure to do that. But then they're left with a nice bit of land on the water in their cities. And, obviously went ahead and built some pretty, creative ways of building homes for people with a good mixture and, high qualities and everything. And I was watching that bit thinking about Glasgow and thinking, Glasgow doesn't own, we don't own maybe Glasgow owned bits of the Clyde, but not in the way that could have enabled that, really. And like Fiona was saying at the beginning, she was a bit kind of, oh God, do I want to watch this film? I'll get depressed. I got a little bit of that. So I sort of, you get into a what if, sort of if only that. But anyway, this sort of thing gets us into another thing I was thinking of. I was sort of thinking, well, no country, when they become independent, it's not a blank page. I mean, no country newly independent is a blank page. There's always something that's there, and we're not going to be a blank page when independence comes. Some of what we've got is going to be in place and it'll be helpful, like the legal system, and we can presumably do a currency pretty quickly, and there's a banking system. We might want to change it, but there's one that could just start off and get us going. But it got me thinking, but other things that are kind of embedded in Scotland at the moment, because we've been part of the UK, that actually are going to will hold us back, and might be a big job to turn around. I mean, land ownership's the kind of obvious one, but there's probably other examples of that as well.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's not meant to be just an endless series of kind of here's how crap we are and here's how easy it was, because it certainly wasn't easy for these guys. It really wasn't. But it's more to try and say, I think, to my mind, if you can try to say, look, we're obviously not doing as well. Well, we're not independent. There's the big one. But when you pull down from that, it's other things like, just exactly as you've observed there, Clydeport own the equivalent areas in Glasgow that you might decide you wanted to completely shift out of town. And it's not actually so much ports, because it's docks, really. There's docks, and this is true of all the cities that used to major on shipbuilding. Are they going to sit with the docks empty, just kind of giving that, unpleasant, yearning feeling in the middle of cities? Or are you able to take a big decision, just remove them and get any port functions that remain a way out somewhere? And yeah, it's totally tough to do that. I mean, at the moment in Fife, down at Burnt Island, they're still having a struggle to even walk on the beach in the harbour area, which actually is theirs by right of, right to roam legislation. But Forth Ports has basically put a big fence up, and nobody's got the money to challenge them.
Look at the struggle they're having getting Ardrossan back. I mean, that seems to just be proving endlessly difficult.
Well, that's a classic, isn't it? You know, it was part of Clyde Authority when it was a trust, and then in comes Mrs. Thatcher, and 10 years later things get sold off, and they don't invest in it, but they take profits out. I mean, it's classic. And now, CalMac saying we can't use this. We've got a nice new ferry, we can't use it. And the call goes out from, actually, ironically, it's the, Scottish Tories and others sort of criticising ScotGov and saying, well, you should have been in there. You should be buying it back and putting public money in to redress the kind of neglect that the private company did. I mean, it's me furious, really. But, I mean, it's somewhat of a smaller example, but yeah, you're right. In I'm in Govan once a week for various reasons, and I usually am having a walk at lunchtime, go past the Govan graving docks, owned by a development company for decades, and it's rack and ruin, and it's just
and we've all got there's just these dead areas that are actually just. They're just being land banked.
Yes.
And so land bank, but the thing is, you could start tackling land banking now. And
yes, we could have a list of what we need back, couldn't we, and start working our way through it.
The point with this is just to try to say, okay, here's scenarios that these guys find really easy. Some of it is, that they've made political choices about it, and it does make you bite the carpet at points, because the stuff, they do seem to be able to move on pretty straightforward stuff because they listen to rationality. One of the places, I think we start the film actually with a wee island called Suomenlinna, which is just outside Finland. It's Finland's #1 tourist attraction. I went there along 2007 when I was part of the Scottish Prisons Commission. And I had gone there with Chris, my husband at the time. We'd gone out to Suomenlinna, had a very jolly day, came back. Chris went off to Scotland. The rest of the Prisons Commission, including Henry McLeish, arrived. We all set off for our first day of the Prisons Commission and went to Suomenlinna because this place is also an open prison. And it's like, what? When we got over there, I can remember there was about 7 of us just absolutely falling off our chairs with one sentence, which was that the local municipality of Suomenlinna, 900 people, they had voted to have an open prison because it would help keep the island afloat because all the prisoners became stonemasons.
Fabulous. Well, it's just so practical, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's just, instead, there's no hysteria, there's no sort of, oh my God, we're all going to be, lock up your children or your daughter, this kind of thing. It's more like they're sitting, they love living on that island. There's only that tiny number of them, 900, but they have the power to make, approve some big decisions like that. And they just thought, actually, that really is in our interest to have these guys here who will, because it was an artificial creation of, I think it was 7 or 8 granite lumps, essentially. Back in 1800, the Swedes spent vast amounts of money creating a fortress outside Helsinki, which was going to fend off the Russians. It seems to me it was a bit predictable that actually there was a big freeze one year and the Russians just walked across the ice. The governor of Suomenlinna just didn't have the heart to have a battle because they just spent so much money building it. He couldn't bear the thought of seeing it all blown to pieces. So it's still a kind of bit of a vexed point. But nonetheless, that's the history of that place. And so it has a long-term future because prisoners are fixing it and getting skills and happy.
Yeah. And I noticed at one point you had a statistic about like the crime rate in Sweden is kind of similar to what it is in Scotland, but the number of people actually in prison is a fraction of it. I can't quite remember. Was it a third, something like that?
I mean, this is it. We've got the same crime rate as mostly everybody around us. I mean, I remember the statistic from when I was on the Prisons Commission, and sadly it's not changed very much. We all think, we're in the middle of a crime epidemic. These other countries have mostly got the same crime rate, but we're imprisoning 3 times more people.
Yeah.
So, but there's just some big thinking needed about all of that. And of course, the fact that they have much higher levels of equality, much lower levels of poverty. I mean, Scotland's doing well, and I've not loaded this statistic properly, but 22% sitting in my head, and I'm not even sure what it is 22% of. But whatever it is, it's the lowest, I think, in the United Kingdom of all the nations in child poverty. Finland is 3.7%.
That sounds about right. We had that discussion with Stuart Donald, the data analyst, and he was pointing out the difference. I think Finland was one of the example, and also the homelessness. They knock us into a cocked hat with their the homelessness stats, don't they? But it's attitude that is at the foundation of that, isn't it? I mean, if we said we're going to put our prisoners on an island, the first thing you'd get is a campaign group from that island saying no, we don't want them, and then the Tories had been the God knows reform would be up there, saying, oh, actually, let's put all the migrants in another island and just leave them there. I mean, it's just these horrible attitudes to contend with.
Well, there could be other islands that would have knocked it back. But if you're living on a constructed island that has, I can't remember, there's something extraordinary. I can't remember how many hundreds of miles of stone wall there is on Suomenlinna. So essentially it's like the Fourth Road Bridge on steroids in terms of just the endlessness of the maintenance needed. So, it's more that the locals had power. It's a non-hysterical system. And there was the solution that would keep the whole thing afloat. And there's many small prisons. It's not just one big Alcatraz or anything like that. And actually, I've got to say, the day that we walked around, Chris and I walked around Suomenlinna, we didn't notice these guys at all. You wouldn't notice, actually, if you went there as a tourist. There's just quietly in the corner, there's a little detention block looking place, and there's wee groups of guys wandering around that are not wearing Guantanamo-looking jumpsuits, so... It's just one aspect of a culture that just, roughly speaking, kind of is able to make rational decisions a lot more easily.
Yeah, to pick us up a little bit, I noticed the cycle track near me that somebody had burnt a couple of the benches there, and there was community reparation teams went in and fixed them. And I cycled past one of the teams. They were working on this bench, and I thought, "You're not taking it away, are you?" And they went, "No, we're repairing it." And they were all just dressed in ordinary clothes. And I was like, "On you go!" And it wasn't until it was repaired that I saw there was a little notice on the bench that said "by the community payback team." And
right, and do you know where that system comes from?
Finland? Yeah. Really?
That's what we're away with.
Oh, well, there you go. A small little link then. I didn't know that when I gave you that example.
Well spotted. I'll need to point that.
Can we talk maybe a bit about the education system? Because that's something that is within our control. It's not something that we need Westminster for. And I happened to notice that there was a petition at the Petitions Committee in October from Upstart about changing the school age, and I just checked on it to see what had happened to it, and it's been closed by the Petitions Committee because they haven't got enough time left in the Holyrood term, which is frustrating to say the least. The Scottish Government has put out all this guidance on play base for early years, and it's very good, but it's still only based on the current system of you start school at 4 or 5 and, you know, anything that happens before then you get to play. Tell us a bit about the education system in Finland.
Well, they're sort of like almost everywhere else. And really, this is what people need to get. It's not that Finland's unusual, it's that we're weird. 82% of the world's countries send their kids to school at 6 and 7. The other 18% are the Netherlands, which is strange. And then the remaining countries are all former British colonies. So there is one country, apart from the Netherlands, that thinks 4 and 5 is a good idea, and it's the country that had the first Factories Act that was trying to put women into factories and needed to put the bairn somewhere. And that's all that explains 4 and 5. Everybody else who had their, you know, just observing life, the universe, children, and kind of a bit of academic expertise at 6 and 7. And the Finns are 7, so they're actually, you know, quite late. They've got a year of preschool, but the bulk of what really seems to make it for them, and the thing that was so striking about the primary school we went to visit was how sort of cheery it was, how few behavioural problems there were, and the teachers totally ascribe that to years in kindergarten where you learn to be part of a group. And what we're doing is we're rushing kids in to a school setting where they have to sit formally. Now, let's just say that the poverty and equality thing is pretty important as well, because those drivers of resentment and all sorts of stuff, and the pretty much underfunding of a lot of public services mean the teachers haven't got time to go, oh, okay, there's a problem here. Let's all sit and sort of describe how we feel about that. They talked at one point that they actually have lessons teaching how to handle disappointment.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, right. That's a skill. But the point is, all these soft skills are the things that go in first. And like, surely there's not anybody left anymore who would question that actually before you start hammering in the 3 R's and all the rest of it, it's this ability to act as a group, to be cooperative, to control your kind of motor energies and so on. All of those things go in first and through play. And then when these guys hit school at 7, they are absolutely hitting the ground running.
There was bits about where they were all playing instruments, and it wasn't just like they had one instrument that they played. And I mean, it'd be good being an orchestra, but then they swapped round instruments, so everyone was playing loads of instruments. Or the wee girl that was working the sewing machine. I mean, I laughed when you said, do you not worry about her getting her fingers caught in the sewing machine? Because that's what would happen here.
I have none of that worry, but I know from watching everything, when we did the thing about Denmark and there was lots of saws close to
yeah.
That was brilliant.
Like this. But really, you know, we're the only ones who are like this about it. And this is also because we haven't got outdoor stuff. We're totally paranoid all the time about what if this, what if that. Our abilities begin to develop. So the only core curriculum that the Finns have, as far as I can see, and I keep feeling the need to check this because it's so mind-blowing, is 1, that you should learn to use a sewing machine, 2, that you should learn to use a saw, and 3, that you should learn to be in a band and learn to play most of the instruments. I mean,
Great. That's great.
And again, it's old-fashioned because I can fairly use a sewing machine because back in the day, I think you might have been the same, you know, we were all made to use that, and I used it because being quite tall, nothing ever fitted me. So, you know, so I was watching all these kids and thinking, God, this just reminds me of sort of...
When I was at school, I used to get, annoyed that, so the girls went to the sewing classes and the cooking classes, but we didn't get to go to the woodwork classes. And then actually, even at my kind of level, year at school, some of the boys actually wanted to go to do cooking, but it was completely kind of segregated at that. I mentioned that to my daughter at one point, and she went, "Why did that happen? I mean, why was that?" And I went, "Yes, that's a good question." Well, because they thought girls would be better at cooking. Well, they probably need that later on.
They were teaching you to be a wife. That's what they were doing. Teaching you to be a housewife.
Well, the best in our cooking classes was a couple of the boys. They're all off being chefs now.
The thing about the education that's also important is just that, I mean, again, this is one of these things where the utter expert in all of this is a guy called Pasi Sahlberg, and he wrote a book called Finnish Lessons that's been translated into 42 languages it is the Bible on all of this, and it's kind of in its 18th edition. He came and spoke in Nordic Horizons 10 years ago, and he's very, very strong on this thing about people being in control of their own schools, their own time, all this sort of thing. But he was the one that kind of pointed out that one of the most important things is this ability to just decide what you're doing with your own time, and not to be doing things by rote. So that the whole point of school, and he says this very lightly, and you think, it's a bit boring, and then you realize how profound it is that education is a right, not a duty. And so the idea here is you just knuckle down. I mean, it's not quite as, whack out of the back of the head as it used to be in maybe our day, but it's still kind of like that. It's just like, you shut up, you get your head down, you have to work through these things. Okay, some of the language will be pleasant, I'd imagine, but still, whereas they look at it from the point of view of, you have a right to an education, and we need to make it interesting. We need to involve you so that you're really engaged as a pupil. You guys, people skiting out, people not being keen, that's a big wound in the side of their education system. It would be in anybody. It would be. But I think that's what it is. They really are working hard to maintain the interest of their students.
There was a line in the petition, the one that's just got closed, where they said the attainment gap is actually a developmental gap. And so that right from the very, very beginning, you've got kids starting into a formal school system who are a year behind in just their interpersonal development, their emotional development and everything. So that's how you can see how that, giving them that extra couple of years, they've got a chance to get onto a level pegging. And that would be part of the equality that we need to bring in.
So they don't start till they're 7, and they don't leave school till they're 19. I think that was so what happens? Our secondary school would take them up to 16, or then what happens?
Yeah, they've got what they call the periscolo, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, which is taking them from 7 to about 15 or 16. They have no external exams in that time. A lot of them don't change school. If they do move physical building at any point in that, the class stays together, and that's another key point on it, is keeping cohorts together. So they all go through together until they're 15 or 16, and then they have their first external exam. That will put some of them into high schools, which are a path to university directly. Some of the rest go to vocational schools. And actually, I spoke to one parent whose lad actually could have gone to high school, but chose vocational school because he wanted to do drama. And you get, the drama school was actually not in their neighbourhood. So at the age of 15 or 16, he would have got actually a little flat to stay in during the working week to go to that drama school and then come back at the weekend. So they go through all of that, and then at 19 they can go. But equally, you can go through vocational school and then decide you want to go to university. So there's endless, you try to explain it to somebody, and there's so many kind of if this, then that, and then you could do that, and then you could change your mind. And this is part of the whole thing. It's kind of like there's huge amounts of, everyone places huge amounts of energy to get the right thing for that particular young person to work their way through.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
So as ever, you sort of come out the other side of watching the film and think there's a whole load of things that we could be doing under our current sit-up if the will was there.
There's a couple of things. I have to say, not that I feel tremendously optimistic about much of this, because I feel like I've spent about the last 25 years banging my head off a brick wall as far as every political party, including the SNP, is concerned. But I would have to say there was a little things that kind of snuck out before Christmas, which is lowering the amount of face time between teachers and children. Now that kind of sounds like, oh, that's bad, isn't it? Well, actually, the Finns have got the lowest face time in the world. And to put it a different way, they have the highest collegiate time. So basically, they spend the most time talking to one another and trying to figure out what will work in class, how that, they unburden themselves, if you like. And the children are quite self-directed. They have relatively short school days. They have modular things, so they're not sitting on very long term times. And all of this is going down the up escalator for a culture which I'm afraid is British, and we still have it, which is you just whack in more and more and more and more of the 3 hours, and you'll come out the other end able to do stuff. So, you know, more is never less here. You know, it's just always just more.
Yeah.
And Finns are exactly the opposite.
Yeah,
it's
and it's, you kind of wonder why we train all these teachers. We're giving them university degrees and then not letting them use them because we're giving them a manual of this is exactly what you're going to do from 5 past till 10 past. You know, it's maybe not as bad as that, but it's an attitude, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, interesting to see teachers coming to see the film. You know, they might say, look, actually, I don't know what idea you've got of what's going on in Scotland, but it's kind of got a lot friskier since you were involved with it. You can't be doing well with kids that start school at 4.
My son started at 4. He was the youngest kid in the school when he started. And the only reason he went to school at 4 was because I was a single parent. I was paying a fortune in childcare and school was free. And it didn't do him any good at all because he was too young and they had them sitting on the floor learning how to write letters. And I would get home, pick him up. By the time we got home, it was 6:30. He'd have his tea, and then he was expected at 4 to do homework, which was writing these letters. And we had a fight about it every night for about 2 weeks. And then I said to the headmistress, I'm not doing it. I am not doing this at 7:30 at night with a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And, you know, he would have so benefited from having that longer time. Definitely would.
Hopefully it's a bit better than that, but than that these.
There's so many British structures of thinking in our lives. And for all that we think we're brand new and there is a lot of difference, there's a lot of things like that are sitting sort of lurking. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon actually brought in tests on 5-year-olds. Now, that's what prompted the creation of Upstart as an organisation, because the young women, by and large, who were the primary 1 and 2 teachers, were just aghast at what they were having to try and do with 4 and 5-year-old children. So, you know, this is, and I would imagine Nicola's trying to say every school's whatever. And that beginning, of course, it sounds fine. It's the beginning of going the wrong way, because it's the beginning of deciding that you can't trust the people who are running something. And of course, the Finns put a lot of money, and the teachers have proved themselves, if you like, with the master's degrees they've got. Although I mean, my mother did always say to me, and I quite enjoyed it actually, when she would say, Lesley, you can be recht clever at some things and recht stupid at others. And so just because you've actually got a master's degree, it doesn't mean to say that you can understand how humans operate, except that a lot of that master's is about understanding the psyche of 6 and 7-year-old.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's all there to do.
It is. It's all there to do, isn't it?
It's all there to do.
For someone to. Before we finish this, can we talk about trees, please? Because I love that bit about, you know, so much of Finland is covered in forest, but not so much of it is original, you know, real, I think, natural forest. A lot of it's plantations. It's an economy, but Finns seem to have that special relationship with trees. I love that. I actually loved that bit. It was great.
Yeah, it's mostly because, I mean, actually, I've been going to Finland for the last 15 or 20 years, and I wasn't exactly doing it to make a film at the end of it. But you realise over time, you've been gathering ideas and contacts and, you know, insights as you go along. And one was this phenomenal book, Tree People. It's usually sitting around here somewhere on the table because I have a wee flip through it and go, wow. But that's amazing because it demonstrates the Finns have got sacred trees, family trees. Remember that, you know, go back to that 70% tree cover, you know, and it was a very rural population for a very long time. Yeah. So families grew up kind of in the middle of in the middle of forests, separated from other people. And the first thing they would do is either they would plant a family tree, and then they would actually go to the tree. They would show the tree the newest born. They would take things to the tree. And this is completely common. Actually, there's bits of Scotland where there's lower of that same sort of thing here, but very, very powerful there. And that is now at odds with a cellulose factory industry, which is not to be knocked because there's a timber industry in there that just doesn't want any of this fancy, that's a sacred tree and that's a grove and everything. They just want stuff to grow, in nice clean lines that can be easily harvested come the day. And so actually an extraordinary proportion of what looks like the groovily forested Finland is actually plantations that are less than 60 years old, something like 70 or 80%. So the people that we spoke to, Sani, who's one of the photographers, artists who pulled all these photographs of people's families' trees together in this amazing book, she is like a one-woman, energetic, upbeat powerhouse of belief that everybody needs woodlands near them for all the sorts of health and just reconnecting benefits that you do get. So that's in there as well.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. Actually, it kind of reminded me of when I was growing up. We moved in. It was 3 houses that we lived in, and in each one of them, my mum insisted that we plant a rowan tree.
Oh, I do that. Yeah,
always a rowan tree at the back in a corner or something. I vaguely kind of think it was something to do with keeping the witches at bay.
Yeah, it should be. It's supposed to be at the front of the house so that the witch can't pass it.
Ours was always at the back in the back garden, but it was quite. I mean, she was absolutely. There was no way it wasn't going to happen because that's what you did, and she picked it up from her mum, I'm sure, actually. But I really liked that. But it's lovely, isn't it? You think about a new baby comes into a family, so you take the new baby to go and visit your tree.
Well, I mean, the whole thing starts with a shot that was in a woodland. I mean, Gavin, who is from Inverness originally and living over there, and he's just so great, Gavin. It was very different doing this. And everything I've done up till now has been, both of us have been coming in, from Scotland, whereas, he's already there playing in a punk band. I did have to say to him, until you've got spit all the way down the back of your jacket, you're not really that punk. So it's astonishing, though, that all the guys that came to help with various things are in his punk band, and they're also an army battalion. They're the most gentle guys. And they are, drone operators, anti-tank commanders. But that's because these guys are on constant reserve duty, So all of these levels of stuff sit sort of similar, together, which is astonishing because you'd think that would make for a very jumpy country.
Marlene and I were talking about, this idea of readiness and bunkers and all these things. We thought, what if we said, right, Glasgow, what's your state of readiness? Because you've got Coolport just along the road. Have you got anything? Where would you go, Marlene, if you had 72 hours notice or even less? Would you go to
if I got 72 hours, I suppose, I'm not sure what I might get in the car and go further south, actually, or further north. But if it was, I'm about half an hour walk from the subway. I suppose, that's where big cities, especially in Russia, actually, their subways are their bunkers. And but that's it. But
5 million people into a subway.
Exactly. And it's
but it would just be mass panic, though, as well, because we're not used to it. Whereas I got the impression that in Finland, it would be, there'll be a siren or something. Oh, I know which bunker I need to go to. Yeah. I know there's food there for me. I'm trained in how to operate X. And I thought, would that not be, although it would be a frightening thing to go through the process of preparing Glasgow, would that not focus on, hang on, we do have nuclear arsenal just a few miles along the road from you. You are now a target. You're one of the biggest targets in Europe because of that arsenal. What about we put some plans in place? Because not only would it raise awareness, it actually would put something practical in place. And then it would be interesting to see if that made people feel more secure because their needs had been taken care of, therefore they build more trust, or if it would just be a mass panic and we'd have the world's media descending to tell us how mad we all were. I don't know.
It'd also be expensive. I sort of think it'd be cheaper just to be independent and get rid of them myself. But,
Well, that's a better option. Let's do that. I did come out of that film thinking there's a number of things that actually are within our ability and within our competence that are just would lend themselves to be individual campaigns. And we've got an election coming up, so let's hope that at least some of our potential elected representatives actually watch the film, because it just says something about the ambition for a country. And you can see clear blue water between our modest little requests that we make of Westminster and what they demand as their right in countries that actually have a bit of common sense.
Yeah, and coming back to that original thing, the Sisu, the courage to kind of keep going, because I mean, the title, we went through quite a few, but actually in the period just around the Second World War, where Finland had basically backed the wrong side, it nearly ceased to exist. It also had that difficult period after its civil war. There was lots of people going, you know, we could just subsume these guys into Germany or Russia or whatever. And that was happening all over the place. I mean, it's continued to happen in the Baltic countries, and it explains a lot of the acquisitive outlook of people like President Putin. So, you know, the Finns were just sitting there about, I've got an aquarium and there's little baby kind of guppies there, and I'm just watching them. They're just about big enough for the big fish to eat, and they're just keeping ahead of them all the time. So Finland, although it's a big country, was sitting in that same sort of position, just about ready to swallow. And look where it's got to now, where it's the world's happiest country. It's the most satisfied citizens. It's got the highest levels of trust between citizens and government and citizens and one another. It's probably got the best education system. It's got the best food security. I mean, my God. So, you know, it's worth a look at it, because they had to take this from nothing.
Yes.
It's
inspirational.
the film's definitely, I mean, I just so enjoyed it, actually. So I hope it's really, I mean, obviously you've got a few set up in cinemas, and after that, if a Yes group or a group wanted you to do a showing of it, is that a possibility later on?
It is. There is just one of me, and as each year goes past, I get a year older. But here I was, you know, belting around through 3 named storms with Lyme disease. Albeit, you know, I caught it early and so on, but still not pleasant. So it's just, I mean, I just tend to hear around. If people want to do something, my default is, yeah, let's do it. But I'm having to slightly watch. So there's a basic structure of where I'm going, and it's good if there's a Yes group. If you can see that you're close to something that's on the, you know, list already, it's not too difficult for me to just stay and do one with you. But to go all the way back to somewhere that's a bit far flung is sort of difficult. Yeah. And there's more being added all the time. The Ayrshire Brigade are now on this, and there'll be one there. So, and Dumfries is getting a date. So there's more being added all the time.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That one you did at Stirling, at the Stirling Smith, was a really good mixture there, actually, of people. This was the last film, the previous film.
So there's the problem, really, because I mean, I have actually approached the McRobert, but you're just reminding me, no reply. It's quite difficult to do this yourself, you know. Just keep on and kind of keep remembering who hasn't replied and so on. And it is actually better if it's Yes groups, to be really honest. Right. It's not that I'm sort of, you know, if it's SNP groups, okay. But I don't really want this to get too mixed up with sort of party politics in the run up to the election. Although I'd like to think that, you know, just going through this sort of stuff leaves people with a sort of, here's the kind of country with an appetite for independence. Yes groups, just get in touch.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. We'll put the link under the podcast for your page on your website with events, and then people know where they can go and have a look. As ever, thank you so much for joining us. It's always fascinating. We loved the film. I'm sure everybody else who watches it will love it. Hopefully, we can do more than just love it. We can actually do something towards achieving some of this. And all the best with your series of events. And we'll catch up with you soon, I hope.
Great. And thank you both. Honestly, you're such kind of, you know, I know what it takes to keep doing what you're doing. You know, when everybody else kind of, you know, has other priorities, you've got family stuff happening, your own levels of enthusiasm and belief rise and fall because you're human, Begorra, and yet you're always here. So, you know, all part of your elbows, you're something else.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.